Hopefully at this point you've had a chance to play around with some action hooks. Now you may have found this not too difficult, or you may have found it a lot harder than you thought. Either way is fine at this point because, as I keep saying, action hooks are going to be something that you use more and more as the complex scenarios arise for them, and hopefully you'll get better at PHP and dig deeper into that along the way so you'll know how to implement whatever it is that you want. In this video, I'm going to go over a few more action hooks that we didn't look at before and just kind of walk through my logic and thinking behind them so that hopefully we could unpack and learn a little bit more. Now the three examples I picked were admin and Q scripts, since it's important to know how to load CSS and JavaScript in the admin area, not just on the front end. Then I wanted to do something kind of like a banner that displayed before the comments section, and I found a hook for that, pre-get comments. Now for the third example, I went outside of WordPress core and I found an action hook in Caldera Forms that was really helpful, and I displayed something there as well, and this could help show how you could tie into other plugins and use the hooks that they leverage for you as well. So let's take a look at each one of these. The first one takes place in the admin area. So what I'm doing is if I click into any post that is a draft, I'm going to load some custom CSS that styles the page differently so they know they're in draft mode and brings attention to the draft button. Now I had to do two things to accomplish this. The first was load an admin style sheet that controls most of the page, and then there's a second step in order to style the TinyMCE or visual editor. So if I come into my functions.php here, and I come down to practice 1, loading an admin style sheet, we could see that we're hooking into admin in Q scripts and calling our WP hooks draft mode styles. So the first thing we're doing here is calling global post. That means that whatever context this function is being executed in, meaning admin in Q scripts, it should have access to the post object that will be used for that page. In this case, the post that's being edited. Now, if there's not a post, we're going to exit out of there and we don't want to do anything further. And this will prevent our styles from being run on a general settings page where there is no post object because it doesn't belong there. If we don't have this line, and then we tried to come down and call post status equal to draft or check to see if post status is equal to draft, then we would get an error in our code saying post is not recognized. So we grab the post, and if it's not there, we bail out because our styles won't apply. Now there are other ways to get more specific about where you load your styles, but this is just a simple example for now. So we could see that we have in Q styles, we hook up our main admin CSS, and it's a file called admin.css. So inside of my assets, if I come down to admin.css, you could see I've got a few things about the button and then the title, but I don't have any of the CSS for the visual editor. We could see that that's in a separate file, visualeditor.css, and it just has the TinyMCE background. In our code, you could see this function add editor style, and it links to that style sheet. I want to explain though a little bit about how I kind of uncovered this and knew where to go and how there were going to be two different style sheets and to load them this way. So to start, I'm going to demo by disabling this action by commenting it out. So notice that if we use our web inspector to select the TinyMCE editor, that we're actually appearing inside of a frame. Now if you've played with CSS and JavaScript before, you'd know that it can be a little tricky and sometimes not possible to style or select items inside of a frame that you want to. So what do you do from there if you come across that? Well, you simply search. So searching for how to add styles to the visual editor will eventually lead you to find add editor style function inside of WordPress specifically for that purpose. And what this will do is inject our style or our CSS into that iframe for us. And that's as simple as that. Now if we save it into draft mode, we could see our styles apply. And if we save it into publish mode, we could see our styles go away. Now we're not changing the draft URL because we don't have that code loaded anymore. So I'm just going to set this back to draft and we should see our styles come back. Now, this is kind of a silly example and I was just playing around for practice. However, this does show you something very important, which is how you can begin to load style sheets for the admin area and customize things with CSS. In our next example, we're going to hook into pre-get comments. And what I wanted to do was display a certain call to action above the comments, encouraging people to comment with something more visual than just a header. Looking back at the code for hooking into pre-get comments, we see that we're simply just loading a template just like we've come to do with many of the other examples. However, we're also loading it inside the loop, and I'll show you why. If I take this out and put it here, and then I come back and look at my theme, notice what happens if I go to another page without comments and scroll down to the recent comments section here. Notice that that hook is also being called outside of the loop in our widget area. Now, luckily, that's something we know how to deal with. All we have to do is put it inside the right conditional statement, and then it'll no longer load in that instance. So here, since our sample page is our main loop and recent comments are outside of it, we don't see that message displaying. Now, in this last practice exercise, I wanted to do something a little bit different and work with a third-party action hook like in a plugin. So what I'm doing is whenever the contact form is displayed on the site using Caldera Forms, I'm going to hook into a Caldera Forms hook and display a message in a similar way that we did with the banner before the comments. So if I turn on Simply Hooks again, we can see that before a Caldera form is a Caldera Forms render start. So since I wanted to find out more information about what was going on with that, I copied that action, came over into my editor, and opened up the Caldera Forms plugin. Now, just like you're going to get more comfortable and often be required to look through WordPress core, the same is now true when working with third-party plugins. So using what we've done before, I simply search their code base for Caldera Forms render start. We could see that the do action is called and then the form is passed into it. Now, I don't even need to go look inside this core.php file to know that in this action instance, I could pass form as a parameter into whatever I want and get access to that as well. That'll let me do a conditional check to make sure that I'm only displaying this message before the contact form and not on top of like the support request form. So showing you the steps I went through, I knew that I could pass form in as a parameter, but I didn't yet know that I could get form ID in this way. In fact, I tried it a few different ways before I got it. So let's take a look at how you could have troubleshooted this and figured it out for yourself. One simple way is to use the same method we have before, which is echoing out some pre-tags and then using a var dump on the form. So now if we come over to the site, we can see that we have an array here with name, description, all of this information, layout grid, array with the field, more stuff being actual echoed out. I keep on coming. We could see processors going on, and then eventually, way down here, I get to ID. Now, I didn't actually scroll that far initially. I just searched for ID, and then I found that that's what it was. And I could see that this matches what I would see if I go in to edit my contact form. I could see that that ID is up here in the URL slug. So CF for Caldera Forms and a long random string. So with that little bit of debugging, I knew that this was an array, and I wanted to select the ID and compare it against this specific ID from Caldera Forms. So that's how we ended up with this code below. I'll go ahead and uncomment this and delete this above. This would be different depending on what form you're working with. However, I knew that if we're working with this specific form, then we want to go ahead and load this custom template on top of it. Now, in the past examples, we could have just hard-coded a message before our comments in our index.php or in our single.php. However, with Caldera forms, we could not actually hard code that wherever that it occurred automatically, and this is a great instance of when we would want to use a hook. So, big props to Caldera forms for making these available for us to use, and you'll also find that there are a lot of third-party developers that have hooks available for you. So what I would suggest is once again play around with these few example practices I gave you and keep trying on your own with action hooks. Search for articles about common action hooks, popular action hooks, action hook tutorials, and you should really begin to get an understanding of how this stuff is used. And if you get into working with saving posts and stuff on the admin, you may find that not only is that really exciting, but it also will help you learn some more PHP along the way. So go ahead to keep practicing with action hooks, absorb what you can, and then we're going to shift gears and start looking at the other type of hooks in WordPress, filter hooks.